So it seems that 10th edition Warhammer 40k has already got its first patch. Let's talk about a combo that's so devastating it couldn't be allowed, and what the patch to it might tell us about Games Workshop's balance changes approach going forward. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking about Games Workshop's latest patch to Warhammer 40k 10th edition. The index rules are coming out thick and fast, and it seems that while we're basically buried under a whole load of new rules, Games Workshop decided that there was one problem that they created for themselves that they wanted to fix sooner rather than later. It's kind of an interesting change as it goes against the way that Games Workshop usually does balance passes, so let's talk about what they've done and why. The combo is the one that I talked about in a video earlier in the week. I'll just run through it very quickly here. This one seems to be one of the most obvious things that they've just really messed up with 10th edition so far. Basically the idea that you can put together 2 squads in the Deathwatch army, 1 command point, and somehow come out with 44 mortal wounds in a single turn worth of damage dealing. Enough to basically gut half an infantry army all in one go, never mind the fact that that's kind of a low yield version of what you can do with it. Potentially if you mess around with Stern Guard, Captains, and other damage buffs, you can get damage output in excess of over 100 mortal wounds per turn if you really go for it. The way it works is to use the Proteus kill team. You have basically 7 veterans with combi weapons, they have devastating wounds, and then 3 Terminators with assault cannons, again all have devastating wounds now. You'll usually be able to hit with the vast majority of those things. The Proteus kill team doctrines give you a +1 to hit, and you can use the Furor tactics for a sustained hits 1. That gets you a lot of hits on the target with devastating wounds, but usually they're only going to go off and get you a mortal wound on either a 4+ or a 6+ for over half the unit. The way it gets particularly nasty is that it combines with this hellfire round stratagem, 1 command point that can be applied to 2 different kill teams at the same time. That gives you all the weapons the anti-infantry 2+ keyword, and as per the anti-rule, basically that means that any wound roll of a 2+ counts as a critical wound, and critical wounds convert to mortal wounds via the devastating wound roll that all these weapons had. Basically it means that even at standard, you're getting about as many hits as you get shots, and then pretty much all of those are converting directly to mortal wounds as well, and you can even do it pretty efficiently out to 24-inch range as well, if you can't even be bothered in buying them a delivery mechanism. You could split the shooting how you like, kill something like 15 Terminators or 22 Intercessors, and as mentioned you could get a third squad with it on the go with a captain to use a free command point, and that could be Stern Guards to double shoot as well. I haven't even mentioned Oath of Moment on this yet, which also increases efficiency against either 1 or 2 targets in Deathwatch. It was all just very, very silly indeed. Even with some of the absolute worst successes of 9th edition, like say the Tyrannid Psychic phase, in general you wouldn't have been getting up to a crazy 50 to 100 mortal wounds per turn, even if there were some limitations like needing line of sight and having short range, and only being maximally effective against infantry and a bit against monsters. I think kind of few people would have debated that this was probably a good idea to rein in. Obviously we want Deathwatch to be strong and playable, but tabling entire infantry squads in one round probably is a bad idea, and I think on balance it's probably best that Games Workshop decide to fix this sooner rather than later. In a little rules update they tagged on to the end of the Imperium Index drop, saying that there's been a very slight update to the Deathwatch datasheets posted earlier in the week. After field tests, our resident tech magus deems that Hellfire rounds were just a bit too dangerous on certain units, and so the stratagem has been tweaked. By field testing, I guess they probably mean reading just about any sort of gameplay focused Warhammer 40k social media recently. I guess having the internet at large pour over your index is probably the easiest way to highlight any errors. In any case, if you click on Index Deathwatch now to download it, if you look at this stratagem, then it now has a rider that it no longer applies to weapons with devastating wounds. Basically, it has been altered to just do nothing on things like combi weapons or assault cannons, but it still hands out that anti-infantry 2+ and monsters 5+ to everything else. As a fix, I think it works pretty well. It's a bit weird that it doesn't work on combi weapons anymore, seeing as they're one of the archetypical weapons of the Deathwatch, but I feel like most players can probably live with that. They do have a couple of other stratagems for special issue ammunition within the index, and this will still be usable on a whole bunch of things that are kind of surprising, including things like high power anti-tank weapons, though it'll be a bit less good on those, seeing as they already wound infantry well. I think it is a good change to make this early for 40k playability. I'm sure most people wouldn't have been using this in say mortal wound combo and casual settings or anything like that, but I feel like it's just the sort of thing that just doesn't really need to be in the game and might just sap the fun a little bit out of Theory Crafty on this building if you just know that probably the most optimal thing is Deathwatch obliterating any infantry on the board with this stratagem. I feel like this quick change is kind of interesting in 10th edition. Games Workshop has actually told us the proposed balance method for 10th going forward. They'll likely still be doing their Codex and Index FAQs and erratas somewhere around 2 or 4 weeks later after the books have dropped, but then for actual balance changes, they'll be doing points changes 4 times a year, and in theory only rules changes around 2 times per year. The balance data states and the points cost changes have been flipped slightly. This one's kind of interesting as it doesn't really fit with any of those patterns. It seems like in a sort of balanced emergency type situation where you can quite clearly see one thing that's probably the strongest thing in the game right now, they are happy to make a quick tweak to a rule. I guess it quite clearly wasn't functioning as intended. It's supposed to make a Deathwatch infantry squad really quite savage against infantry, but not so savage that they can wipe out multiple other squads just off their own steam. I think the speed of it is really quite nice, and is maybe doable because they've got a digital rule set these days. I don't know whether things might slow down again if they had codexes and they actually just needed to update FAQ docs for those. I guess with the Warhammer 40k app that they're updating soon, that could be another way to deliver some digital rules updates if they actually made it good enough to be reliable and usable by many. I think it's also fairly positive as well that it shows they're listening to community discussion. People from the balance team are actually keeping an eye on social media, and when something gets flagged as a fairly obvious problem, they're happy to respond in response to it. Though I guess while this example I think was quite good, it's probably not the sort of thing that they really want to push the button on too often. Sometimes online discussion can be a bit on the hyperbolic side. Still though, this does kind of remind me a little bit of what happened with the Leagues of Votan perhaps, a codex that was quite clearly so strong that it was going to dominate the entire meta, and even with the fairly apocalyptic points nerfs that they got, it still wound up being kind of strong in Warhammer 40k. They certainly weren't a weak army in ninth. Whenever they make these sort of swift changes, though, you do also get a whole load of people saying that the index cards or whatever will already be out of date before they even release them. I guess technically that's kind of true, though honestly I don't really find it that big a deal. Personally, I found it at least fairly easy to remember 1 or 2 minor rules changes on them. Devastating wounds weapons aren't exactly everywhere, and I feel like remembering that you just can't do that combo with almost unlimited mortal wounds, that's not going to stress people out too much. Obviously, it's not ideal though, it would be quite nice just to have them right, but realistically, that's just not going to happen. These things are printed months in advance. If a weird interaction isn't seen till later, then it's not like they're going to reprint the entire set of index cards and delay things by months and months for people to be able to get them. Personally, I'm kind of happy to see them fix their mistakes rather than just pretend everything's fine. At least at the moment, you can download all the rules completely for free. I think it's quite a nice, feels good place to be for a Warhammer 40k rules delivery point of view. It's not something that they've ever had in the past. Let me know your thoughts though on the rules combo, the change and how they've handled it. Will be interesting to hear your guys' takes on 40k game balance and how they implement it. If you enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more like this, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked down in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.